Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar with Todd Janzen. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. Looks like we're still seeing people come in. If you could do us a favor and type into the chat if this is your first time joining a PreSales Collective webinar or not. All right. Couple of first timers. Some non-first timers. I see some Salesforce familiar faces. Great to see you. Jeff, Omar, welcome back. Dave, welcome back. All right, we're going to get started in just a moment. Jose. Love the familiar faces. Love the new faces as well. Really appreciate those joining us for the first time. Looks like we still have some people trickling in, but I'm going to go ahead and get started here in just a second. All right. Okay. Let's get started, and we can, as those who join in, we'll be able to join. So I'm James Kakis. I'm your host today from the PreSales Collective, also Senior Manager, Solutions Engineering at Salesforce in the manufacturing vertical. And today I am joined by Todd Janzen, Global VP of Solutions Engineering and Q Branch. And Todd is no stranger to the PreSales Collective webinar. This is his second time. So welcome back, Todd.
Yeah, glad to be back. Thanks, James.
Yeah, glad to have you. And I'm really excited for today's topic. So making your pre-sales team an innovation center, I think this is a very good topic. It's a hot topic to talk about. And I think you're someone who has a lot of experience in this field. So hearing from you again, we're very appreciative, and thanks for your time.
Yeah, as always.
Anything else you want to give us from an intro? I know you have a little bit of a slide here in a moment.
No, we can just jump into it. But yeah, so Todd Janzen, I run a group here at Salesforce called Q Branch, and I've been in September will be my 16th year with Salesforce. So I've seen some change over the years, and when I created Q Branch around 13 years ago, it was really a napkin idea, right? And so I really feel like I've been able to operate a startup within a company that's gotten really, really big. And yeah, I'm excited to share some of those details today.
Appreciate it, Todd. Congrats. 16 years. That's a long time in one company, and such a good company as well. So for everyone who's joining, first time, multiple times, just want to say thank you for joining the PreSales Collective and really leaning in. It's been really great to see the PreSales Collective from an idea a couple of months ago, turning into a real global community that has been really coming together, helping out those in need, especially those that have been affected from COVID-19 in terms of jobs. It's just been great. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who's here today. You have a lot of things that are taking your attention, and spending time with us is appreciated. If you are new to the PreSales Collective, I just wanted to briefly highlight some of the things that we're doing so you can get familiar with our content in general. So we are putting about 2 or 3 blogs out per week, and you're seeing those from PreSales professionals all over the world. We also have a bi-weekly newsletter called Beyond the Demo, which has been great in its own medium of content. And then our webinars have been weekly. We've been doing this since April, and have been doing weekly webinars in the US time zone, EMEA, APAC time zone. And it's been great to see and hear from these amazing professionals. And then we've been doing a podcast. We started a podcast about 2 months ago that runs every Monday, short, sweet, 30, 35 minutes, super impactful. But most importantly, I want to talk about our Slack community. If you haven't joined our Slack community, we have different geo groups. We have a jobs channel. There's been a lot of discussion and conversation going on, so please check that out. We have leadership roundtables. So if you're in leadership, we're doing some connecting of leaders across the globe. And then we have some discussion boards as well. I won't go into it too much, but if you haven't familiarized yourself with some of these offerings, I definitely encourage you to do so. It's been so great to see the community connect together. And just a little advice for today is how we're going to make the best and the most out of today's webinar is ask questions in the Q&A. So Todd and I wanted to make sure that this was very conversational. So this is, Todd's got a presentation. I've got some questions for Todd, but we want to make sure that you have questions for Todd, for myself, and that we can get those answered. Like that's going to make the most of our time together. And then be active in the chat. Let us know what you like, what you agree with, what you disagree with. Feel free to give us comments in there. We'll ask you some questions, but being active will get you the most out of today's webinar. And before we get started, I just want to ask a question of what option best describes your role. It just allows us to tailor our message a little bit better to understand who our audience is. And while people are voting and doing that, I just want to talk about actionable takeaways. So what will you get from today's session is how to elevate your pre-sales function, elevating pre-sales into forecast, strategy, and planning, and then understanding the changing landscape. And that's definitely a topic we're looking forward to getting into. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Todd. If you haven't voted or put in your role, please do so. And Todd, floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, James. So as I mentioned before, Todd Janzen, VP of Q Branch. Look, I'm an engineer at the core. I'm an engineer at heart. I went to school, studied engineering, went to Cal Poly. If we have any Mustangs out there. Got a degree in engineering, went into consulting after school, and then was lucky enough to find the solution engineering job. And I will just say that I love this job. I love the profession of solution engineering. I consider myself a lifer, and I'm just super passionate about it and super passionate about giving back to the community. So, engineer at the core, probably played with Legos way too late in life. As James said, been at Salesforce, almost 16 years now. And that's a picture of me on my first day of Salesforce in my bootcamp class there. That was the entire start group back in 2004 for that month. And I consider that the first day of being a solution engineer. And as the joke goes, there I am, eyes wide open to my potential here at Salesforce. So today, want to talk about some ideas for innovation in pre-sales, and I'll just forewarn everyone. Innovation is not my favorite word, and it's not my favorite word because I feel like it's been so diluted and overused in business. And so often someone has a innovative idea, but they don't do anything with it. And so when you hear me talk about innovation, in my mind, it's not innovation until you've taken it from paper napkin idea to implementation, and you're actually doing it. So, everything I talk about today is not in concept. It's going to be real. And then when I hear that word, that's what I'm talking about. James, was there any questions so far, or should we just dive into this?
No, I think we're good to dive in.
Okay. All right. So, I did a webinar previously with the PreSales Collective, and we kind of talked about Q Branch and how to make kind of a special ops teams within your organization. And one thing I realized was there's a lot of teams out there that they're not ready to have that discussion yet, or they're small, right? And they're like, hey, we're a team of 8, we're a team of 10. And I've had plenty of peers go join small startups, and I love calling them up after their first month of being there. I'm like, hey, did you create this org? Did you create this role? Like, what did you do? And their response is like, hey, Todd, we're just trying to get everyone to do qualification, right? Like, we just need to drive some discipline around that. And then after that, it's like, hey, we're doing a lot of feature function demos. We got to start telling better stories, right? So I put this up here because I hear that a lot. I just think, proper qualification and storytelling is table stakes. And we're going to talk about a lot of things today, but if you're not down that journey, I think you really have to start that. And that's not to say you can't do some of the other things at the bottom here. You absolutely can, but I think you got to get your house in order with those two things. I don't know, James, do you have any thoughts on that? Take that as a no. And so, besides those two, what's next on the list? What should you be looking for? And so, a special ops team. What does that mean? And I have a slide after this. I'll kind of walk you through. But you should start to think about roles outside of just SEs. And I think an easy place to start is with scale functions. So, think about those roles that just can get amplified. So for example, if setting up demo environments is a huge drain on every one of your SEs, I think that's an awesome place to start, right? Throw one person at it, two people at it, start getting the scale of your demo environments down, right? Start to get a hold of that. The next thing you might want to think about is tools. When I talk about tools, these would be tools that help SEs cut down their demo prep time. So an example of a tool might be an app that loads data with a click of a button, or an app that customizes all the data in a demo environment based on what industry you're presenting to. So I think, to get started, I think those are two critical areas. And frankly, when I talk to my peers out in industry, those are the first two places they start. James, I don't know if we have any questions or if you wanted to chime in there.
No questions yet. I think
Okay.
I have some things to add, but I'll go ahead and after the next slide.
Okay. Yeah. And then later on, we'll talk about this in a little bit. How do you add more value to the sales cycle? And I think that's really key. At some point, you can't just be the demo team. And so we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then we'll end today talking about automation and where I think that really comes into play.
Yeah, appreciate this walkthrough.
So for those that were curious, what a special ops team might look like, we covered this on the previous webinar. Stop making unicorns out of your SEs. What I'm basically saying is like, hey, it's unrealistic to have an SE have all of these skills and do them well. So at some point, you probably need to start breaking out those skill sets and hire teams and build teams that directly do those things. And so I'll clear this pretty quickly, but we hire great SEs. What is core to the SE DNA? They're curious, they're problem solvers, they love being with customers. But on top of that, if we're being realistic, there's a whole lot of other things we expect SEs to be. And if we're not expecting it, our AEs probably expect this out of their SEs. So we, of course, we think they should be incredible developers, right? They should be good at doing webinars. And I will tell you, doing a webinar is very different than doing a stand and deliver demo. We'd expect these SEs to be amazing at UI, UX design. They'd love to do RFPs. They'd be amazing at deal strategy. They'd be great at PowerPoint and Google Slides and touching those things up for their AEs. They'd be great at making video, which, believe me, is an entirely different skill set. They'd be versed in value, and they'd work value into every one of their conversations. And as we kind of were just talking about, in their spare time, all the spare time they have, right? they create demo prep tools and build incredibly scalable demo environments. And if that doesn't have you cold sweating right now, if you go above the blue line, we expect our SEs to be amazing storytellers and writers. They should be able to create transformative visions, right? They should be able to dream up what Tesla is going to be in 5 years from now. And if that's not enough, we expect them to be in the room with someone like Elon Musk and crush that presentation. And so it's just not realistic, right? At some point, you're going to have to start breaking apart the unicorn, as I like to say, and start to build out these teams. And it was really interesting. After the last webinar I did, Peter Cohen sent me an email of kind of all the things it would take to master the SE role. And I don't know what the exact number is, but I was scrolling for a long time. It was like 60 to 80 things. So if this list here scares you, the reality is it's much bigger. And so look, I just want to quickly kind of go through what a special ops team and start to get people thinking about where they might start to invest.
Yeah. And thanks for that, Todd. And there's some good comments coming in and some good questions. I think from my perspective, you've talked a lot about, the fundamentals, right? Companies need to get the fundamentals right. And I think we absolutely agree on that. But I think what I've heard and starting to hear a little bit more, which I'm not sure I agree with, is that people feel like, hey, I'm so focused on the fundamentals, I'm not looking into these augmented teams. I'm not looking into this right now. It's not on my radar. But from my personal experience, and again, just personal based off some previous working experience, we had this type of role on an 8-person team, and it did wonders for us. And so, what advice do you have out there for people who just say, I'm not ready for it? Because you're right. There's a level of sophistication you might not be ready for, but there might be a level of introduction to this that help you while you're doing the fundamentals.
Yeah, I think you just need one person, right? You just need one person. Let's call it a team of 8. You just need one person that is frankly pissed off enough and sick and tired of doing the same old thing. And that's really my story, right? When I created an environment at Salesforce called the Simple Demo Org, gosh, maybe that was 14 years ago now, 15 years ago now. I was that guy. I was so frustrated and I was so sick of my nights and weekends being consumed by really basic demo prep. And so I decided to make a demo environment for SEs by SEs. And so I would say 1 in 8 is there, right? 1 in 8 is going to get there soon, that frustration level. And I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
I wasn't a great developer, but I had the ideas. And so I teamed up with the developer to then go execute on the plan.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And actually, I like what Steve Klein just mentioned, is that part of our job is also psychologists and reading a room of personalities. And that's what makes us unique.
Absolutely.
So add that in there. One of the things, Todd, is we've talked about previously is making an argument for adding this type of role, right? So what have you done in your past that have said, hey, we can justify this role, we need this role, and here's why?
Yeah, I mean, just to net it out, I would say try and get an agreement with finance to where you could hire 2 of these roles for 1 SE. Mm-hmm. And that depends where you're going to hire them in the country or in the world. Yeah. And it really depends on kind of who that person is. But if you can get that loose agreement from finance, it makes it a lot easier down the road to justify the investment, because something I've seen as companies get bigger and bigger, it gets really easy to just justify an SE headcount. But if it's like, SE versus someone that specializes in RFP, they typically go, well, with the SE, I get an SE and I'm just going to make them do RFPs. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For example. So I think when you get that 2 for 1, you make it really enticing to be able to build a team like this.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And Sean Albright just asked a question around, like, how do you find getting an iterative process and getting adoption helps in this regard? Like, for example, they've implemented a similar model fairly successfully early on, but what got leadership's attention was direct impact on deals won, right? So, what kind of thoughts or advice do you have in terms of that specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I love that. If you can track to the deal level the work that's being done, and so for most of my teams that aren't necessarily focused on scale, right? They're writing code that's going to go into a demo. We get a request, right? We associate that request to an opportunity record so that we can track that impact. 100%, you have to do that. It gets tougher on the scale side, right? Like, and so for me, it's really simple. Scale is all about saving time. And at some point you have to convert that time into hours saved, days saved, and ultimately how many heads did you save the business?
Absolutely.
And that one's a lot harder to track.
It is, but it's what gets the attention. And Pam just asked about exec alignment and getting a group needed for this. But I think what Sean brought up and what you just mentioned, getting that exec alignment or getting that justification early on helps make this process happen over time.
Yeah. I'd also say, like, many of the teams that I've spun up have been totally under the radar. It's just, I've seen a pattern of behavior and I go, hey, why don't you go do this role for the next 6 months and let's see what it is. And then it explodes.
I like that. I like that a lot.
I'm definitely a ask for forgiveness later kind of guy.
I agree. I'm the same. It's just easier that way, right? It's just easier. If it goes well, then, maybe you don't get as scolded as hard as you would have if you would have asked in the beginning.
Yeah. 99% of the time it works out really well. Yeah. So, James, you and I were talking earlier about, the mission at QBranch and kind of where did it start and has it evolved? And so, our mission from that napkin idea has been consistent. Like, I've been showing this slide for probably 13 years. Granted, I've evolved it a bit. So, I'm not showing you something totally stale, but it's that thing on the left. We were all about maximizing SE's customer facing time any way possible. And so there were some really obvious ways to do that. And it started initially with us hiring developers. It was hiring developers so our SEs didn't have to spend time at their desk coding. And, that was pretty simple. And we saved people a ton of time because most of our SEs weren't developers to begin with. So that was huge, right? And that was kind of the first gold record, if you will. And then we started building scalable demos, started building tools. We started hiring designers because we realized sometimes we actually don't need to make some of these apps. We just need to prototype them and confirm with the customer, hey, is this resonating with you? And so, again, it was all about saving the SE time. And if, if you think back to that kind of matrix I was showing you, it was augmenting that, right? It was saying, hey, if you're an SE and you're not great at that, come over here. We'll do it for you, and we'll do it really fast. And here's what's weird is sometimes you have to go to weird places to save an SE time. And so I'll give you a great example. About 2 years ago, we built a demo environment that wasn't for SEs. Like, that's crazy. Why would you waste your time? Well, we built a demo environment for BDRs and AEs, and we made it, really simple. There was no configuration, no customization. You spun it up, it was on, it worked. And there was embedded video to train people on, talk tracks and things like that. And you might ask yourself, like, why would you go do that? Well, we knew if that AEs and BDRs were able to do some of those entry-level demos, we just saved SEs a ton of time. So, again, that mantra, maximize SE's time, it was kind of a roundabout way to do it, but it worked.
Yeah, Todd, I like that a lot, right? Because I think so many times we're talking about making innovation in your pre-sales team. We are focused on what we're going to do for our SEs. But if we do enable our BDRs and our AEs from not bringing us in early deals, especially unqualified deals, it's going to just save us and allow us to be a little bit more impactful and better with our time overall.
That's it. That's the name of the game. But, so it was interesting, Q Branch, it's been humming along for a long time. It's been working really well. And then at some point, we might build 20 assets for a demo. And then after the demo, the meeting, we'd ask the SE, hey, how'd it go? Tell us how the meeting went. And sometimes we'd hear, yeah, we only showed about 3 of the things you guys built. It's such a gut punch because, people were staying up nights and weekends and, logging overtime and not so good. And so about 8 years ago, we quickly realized is that we needed to start swimming upstream in a different way. And so instead of just being downstream, taking the request to build widgets, what we realized is that sometimes in the account teams, there's a lot of dysfunction. There's not an agreement on what we need to show. There's no story, right? The account team is not talking about story.
Right.
They're just talking feature function. And so really had this idea of like, hey, I need to embed someone at the account team earlier to orchestrate those meetings, force the story to happen, because the stories weren't happening. We were talking about it. Mm-hmm. We were preaching story. I tell people this all the time. I thought I was going to die on Story Hill at Salesforce. I really did. And so we started hiring a completely different profile. We went out to advertising agencies and brought some people in that had totally unique backgrounds, like almost couldn't relate to them from a solution engineering standpoint, right? It was just like they were pure creatives. They were big thinkers. And so, if you take all those tiles at the bottom there, that was kind of where Q Branch had been operating for the first 6 years.
Yeah.
And then we started working on deal strategy and account strategy. And this wasn't someone that came into the account team and said, hey, move over. The big guns are here to tell you how it's done. It wasn't that at all, right? I mean, we all know that there's big personalities and look, we're not the salesperson. We're not the one whose risk is on the line. And so it was really that coach, right? And you see this in sports teams, James, we were talking about this.
Yeah.
You don't go hire specialty for every single thing, right? And if you look at like a football team, right, they have specialty coaches for everything from running to passing to catching to weightlifting, right? And so that was kind of the model that we used was to send coaches into the account team and really go upstream to try and drive to drive better results.
Yeah. Todd, I love what you've done with Q Branch over the years, right? And one of the things that you mentioned in terms of working with the account teams, and this was something that Pam Dunn had just asked about, is like, what's the engagement model on this type of thing, right? Like, how do AEs or SCs bring in these types of groups, and when is their actions actually warranted to spend time on a deal?
Yeah, I mean, just to net it out, you need to focus really on your biggest deals to do something like this. I won't go into the details, but the teams that I have that do this are extremely small. And I will say the results speak for themselves, and I can't really get into details there, but it works. And if you focus that on your largest deals, those largest deals will come in with a much higher probability than anything else you're doing.
Yeah. And to that point, and what I do know from my experience at Salesforce now too, a lot of the things you have already done is a lot of the automation, and you've put those things in place that allow you to have more nimble, focused teams that can handle some of these bigger deals versus maybe in the beginning it was catering to a larger crowd to try to automate and scale processes.
Yeah, James, that's a really key point. I'm glad you brought it up because we talked earlier about how innovation and how you should create some of these teams. If you can't take some of the stuff off the SE's plate, you're not freeing their mind to go tackle some of these things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a really good point. And Dave Johnson asked a good question earlier was, what do you think about some of these functions being part of product marketing or product/engineering teams versus being in the pre-sales function?
Look, every company's different. And so take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. Selfishly, I think they should be in solution engineering because, again, I want solution engineering to get that stamp of innovation.
Yep.
I want them to be born out of the SE role. But here's why I say that unselfishly and just kind of factually. SEs are closest to the customer. They're closest to what's happening every day in the front lines. And I think that's so critical. And if you're not on the phone with customers every single day, every single week, you start to lose that.
Yep.
And that's where it gets a little dangerous if they get sucked up and put in other parts of the company.
Yeah. I like what you just said there, because I think so many times in my experience, we're like, oh, let's get marketing's opinion or product marketing's opinion. And they have something that's so high level, but isn't actually applicable to the ground that you're like, okay, this is great, but it only gets me 20% of the way, 25% of the way. I still have to do all my own homework. And so I like that you bring that up, because then it's also our goals are aligned, our strategies are aligned, our values are aligned, and it's kind of humming in a little bit different of a vacuum versus being a little bit more disparate and having to be more collaborative.
Yeah. And look, if product marketing is talking to customers every single week, great. Like it can probably live there and thrive. But when I built that demo environment 15 years ago, my frustration because I was getting killed on the front lines. I was taking an environment that was not made by SEs. It was made by some other group to remain nameless. And I was getting crushed.
Yeah.
So,
well, situations like that are the ones that force innovation.
Yeah. We were talking about this, and this is kind of a sensitive topic. And I don't subscribe to it, but I think, to talk about the elephant in the room is that we often just get labeled the demo people, right? Pre-sales engineers, sales consultants, solution engineers. We're often just kind of put in this bucket of demo people. And I get it, right? I don't love it, but I get it. And it gets back to just creating a demo, right? If creating a demo at your current company is hard, if it takes you 3 hours just to get an environment stood up, if it takes you another couple hours to load data just to get, the basics in there, yeah, demos are hard. And so when we think about adding these other roles and these innovative roles and, a team of one that just handled the demo environments and made them scalable, right? What might have taken 6 hours just to get a demo org up to like a basic level, you've now removed that. And what does that SE get to do with that 6 hours? And so I think that's a really critical step in moving in a strategic direction. I mean, you used this analogy on the last webinar, James, and or I used it over at the Consensus webinar. There's a difference between a cook and a chef, right? At the basic level, both do the same thing. They both love to cook food, but one takes orders and the other one runs a business. And I don't think that's any different than solution engineers. If it's hard enough just to make the meal, right, you're a cook, right? And that's how we get labeled the demo people. Mm-hmm. But when we can free up that time from some of the basic stuff, that's when we turn our SEs into chefs and they start running the business. So, I'll go back to what we started talking about. I think you have to create some of those functions so that you can move your people out of that demo people zone and into kind of more the executive chef here.
Yeah. And I love what you're saying here. And we've just got a bunch of comments that said, I love this. I love this. And actually with the PreSales Collective, we're doing a podcast. Well, it's been recorded with Peter Cohan on analogies and metaphors. And after your presentation with Consensus, he messaged me after. He's like, that was one of the best that I've ever heard for our profession. And I really like this. And we continually talk, and you and I talk about this, Todd, seat at the table, being a co-pilot, making sure we're viewed in deals. And I think this is the best way to view it. And I hope people listening, I'm getting a lot of comments. This is awesome. Todd's great analogy. I mean, this is it. And I think if we all kind of think about this in terms of our role, it's a nice little North Star to continue to evolving our sales teams wherever you are in the process, to think about this in terms of our approach.
Yeah. Wow. I'm humbled by that comment from Peter Cohen. I'm like, I've got chills right now. That's pretty awesome. So James, we were talking about, besides kind of these special ops teams, how else can a solution engineer organization add more value to the sales cycle? And I think scorecards is a really great way to do this. And James, I know you and your team use scorecards religiously, and I'll show you guys what this looks like in a bit. But a scorecard is really the SE's opinion on the deal. And what's great about this, we'll talk about the two types, is that for an SE to weigh in and have an opinion on the deal, it really gives you a sense of your pipeline health and deal health, right? You're getting more than one opinion. We're preventing the AE from having happy ears. No, I'm hearing all the great stuff, right? You actually have the SE who was also in the room saying, no, I didn't hear it that way. And James, what I like about this is it allows the SEs to express themselves.
Yep.
But it also allows managers like yourself to go into the room with the RVP or the AVP. And now you can get engaged in pipeline and forecast reviews.
Yep. I love it.
You have a seat at the table.
Yep. And healthy friction, right? Healthy friction is one of those things that this allows us to be able to do when something's being forecasted to senior leadership and we just don't believe it, right? And our team has a different viewpoint. And sometimes the answer is somewhere in the middle. But I love that this is becoming part of what we do.
Yeah, this is a big step in going from demo people to seat at the table.
Yeah. And, I know we got a couple of slides on this, but I think what's so timely, as Todd, you and I were talking about right before, is in times of COVID and where we're at now, there's so much scrutiny on the pipeline and on deals. And how many organizations, and feel free to say it in the chat, I won't share, have had deals in Q1 and Q2, COVID hit, and they said, push them out to Q3, push them out to Q4. And here we are approaching Q3 and Q4, and we have all this junk in the pipeline. And I will say from my own personal experience, we have very senior leadership looking at the pipeline from the AE perspective, but also looking to see the SE comments and the SE scorecards and questioning the deals that are forecasted with negative scorecards. And I think right now, when deals are so important to the business, it's more important than ever.
Yeah, I'm seeing it, James. I mean, there's never been more scrutiny on the pipeline.
Yeah.
And so I would say if you haven't done scorecards and you've been thinking about it, there's no better time like the present to jump in.
Yeah.
There's two types of scorecards. There's binary, which is kind of yes, no. That would be like, did we provide them a demo? Did we demo this specific thing? Did we do a value analysis? Have we asked who the competitors are? Like, those are very binary and they're yes, no. And it's maybe a very safe way to dip the toe in the water for an SE organization, because it's not an opinion.
Right.
It's black or white. It's yes, no. And so that's maybe a good place to start. The second type is more subjective. It's where we're really asking the SE's opinion on what's your take on this. And that one might be a little bit harder because, like you said, it's going to create some healthy friction. And you might need to work up to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And for obvious reasons, I had to kind of blur out a lot of the text here, but this is just an example of what a scorecard might look like. And so on the left-hand side, you have questions, and then you have a 1 through 5 scale, 5 being amazing and awesome, 1 being no way on planet Earth. And so you can imagine an SE going through and filling this out for a deal, which is pretty self-explanatory. Maybe they're adding some comments as well, some color commentary. And if we go to the next screen, what you'll see is you can do these snapshots over time. So it's not really a one and done thing. Hey, I did my scorecard, I'm done. You might want to take snapshots every week. That would probably be aggressive. Every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, every month. And what you can do is you can start to sum up those numbers into a score. And so you give each deal an overall health score. And then the short example here is you can kind of see the trend over time and how it's tracking. Is it going in the right direction? And what I love about this is you can start to make decisions about this deal. Should we continue to pump resources into it? Or is this thing not going in the right direction? Let's cut bait while we can.
Yeah, and I really love the historical aspect of scorecards, right? Because we get to see if things are actually trending green or they're trending red, and why, right? Because I think a lot of times in organizations we might do scorecards, but it's in time, and you don't get to see what's kind of happened behind the scenes in the historical context to get us to where we are today.
Yeah, totally. So just to recap the benefits, so there's tremendous benefits to the sales side of the house, right? They get a second opinion, and it really prevents that happy ears. They can decide where to focus next in the deal. Like I said, it provides health on that particular deal. And then, of course, when you sum up all those deals, now you're really getting pipeline health. And again, the benefits to pre-sales, they're obviously, quite large as well. It's really SE efficiency. When everyone's on lockstep on what to do next, you reduce that wasted time. We're going to focus our SEs on the right deals. This will translate to increased win rates. And as mentioned before, SE leadership now gets a seat at that table, and we move from being the demo people to sales executives.
Absolutely. So Todd, we got a number of questions on this. And, one of them that Ethan asked, and I think our viewpoint's a little bit skewed because we work at Salesforce, but he's talked about how we're storing this objective scorecard info, right? He's heard that it's hard to centralize this type of SE function. So do you have any opinions on that?
I think the only opinion I have on that is the change management on this is real. And for an SE to leave their honest opinion in a text field on that opportunity record, it takes some discipline.
Yeah. And
you got to ease into it, right? You can't just launch like a whole new scorecard thing overnight and just be like, hey, by the way, AEs, we're now scoring you.
Yeah.
You gotta ease into this, baby.
Well, I'm glad you bring that up because I got a number of comments, a number of questions around the topic of healthy friction. So it sounds like I've maybe caused a little bit of healthy friction with the audience. So when it comes to scorecards, one of the questions that Dave asked is, do the AEs also do these types of scorecards, or are they just doing their normal forecasting?
From my experience, they're doing their normal forecasting. It's just the pre-sales function that's giving these scores.
Yeah. And how about AE, and Pam asked about AE visibility to these scorecards, right? Do these AEs have visibility, or is it only at the sales leadership level?
No, they do. And I think that's part of the trust relationship, right? And that's also, if you want to sit at the table, you got to have that trust and transparency. Yeah. And what it also means is that an SE is not going to go into those comment fields and say something like, wow, AE totally showed up unprepared and blew that last meeting.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, that's what you might be thinking. What you might put in that box instead is, hey, based on last call, I think we need to go in and touch on these areas and probably go talk to the CIO because there seems to be a lot of concern about integration. I'll just in here, but.
And I like that. And then, there's a follow-up question, and just your perspective before we move forward is, what do you think about situations where the AE's got this forecasted and piped, the SE scorecard does not match, and there's a disconnect there? Like, what have you seen in your experience?
Look, it's been a while since I've been in a meeting like that, but again, it's probably the SE leader that's having some honest conversations with the RVP about what's next. There's a huge disconnect here, right? It's a dialogue.
Yeah.
And it forces the dialogue, and that's the key. Right. This isn't about like, hey, your guy or gal scored this a 72. I really think it should be an 82. Yeah. It's like, how do we get it to an 82?
Right. And that collaborative effort, right? And there's a couple follow-up questions that I think we'll get to after our next section. Okay. But I think there's a lot of interest around this in terms of applicability.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a stat I learned about a couple weeks ago. So my talk track from here on out is pretty hot off the press. So 82% of the deal is done without the sales rep. And this is from Gartner. And 80% of buyers want more support in the buying process. Also Gartner quote. So I heard this And it's actually been keeping me up at night. Because another way to look at this is that the sales rep only impacts 17% of the deal. And then I think about SEs and pre-sales, like what's our impact in that?
Yeah.
And so, this was pretty shocking and almost unbelievable. But I'm glad Gartner did the research. But I'll tell you why this is so believable if we go to the next the next quote. And this is directly from a white paper that's out on the Consensus website. The Consensus team, these guys are just thought leaders in the pre-sales space. I'll reference the white paper here in just a bit. But they did a study of solution engineers. And the study said that 60% of prospects wait at least a week for a demo. When I looked at this, it was totally believable. And then I saw that 20% wait at least 2 weeks. Okay, so what is this saying? This is saying that buyers want education and information, and they have to wait at least a week to get it. And this is what's been keeping me up at night, because I know exactly how this happens. And it happens because solution engineers, their time is so valuable, and we try and protect their time. And we're not just going to go demo to anyone, which is good, which is like everything you read, right? Every sales methodology, everything is like, don't get on and do the harbor cruise, right? But the con of that, the impact of that is that buyers can't get educated and they're waiting weeks to do it. And so, this is really interesting. It's like, wow, by no one's fault, kind of solution engineers and doing demos has created the largest bottleneck in the buying process. And so this is what really got me curious.
Mm-hmm.
I just, like I said, it's kind of haunting me lately. If anyone's curious, the white paper, it's called Scaling Pre-Sales, 8 Strategies to Boost Coverage and Customer Experience with Existing Headcount. But that, so as of lately, the last couple of months, I've really been focused on, well, how do we remove that bottleneck? And so obviously I spent a lot of time out on the Consensus website. They have incredible white papers. And, before I go any further, I'm not here to pitch the product. I voluntarily brought up this material, but the reason I'm doing that is because these guys are such thought leaders in the pre-sales space. So if you haven't spent time out there, go consensus.com, do yourself a favor and start reading some of these white papers, because they've done the studies, they've done the math. It's really incredible. And so, okay, we're the biggest bottleneck. Congratulations. Solution engineers are the biggest bottleneck in the sales process. No, I'm kind of being funny about it, but not. So how do we eliminate that, right? How do we increase demos? Well, James, you and I talked earlier about, well, let's make demo environments for BDRs and AEs. That's great, right? That's one way. That would be called delegation. And very few organizations actually do that. I think less than 30% of companies actually delegate the demo to someone other than the SE. But you still have a problem. Like, that's going to be surface level buyer education. Like an AE and a BDR are going to be covering, kind of high level product details. And so what I love about this Consensus tool is that it's automated demos, right? They're videos, and the customer can personalize it. They answer a few short questions, and it's like choose your own adventure. They stitch together a tailored demo, and the customer can then watch these at their leisure. And so what I like about it, it's not just videos, it's automation. It's also personalized, and personalized is really key. For anyone who's like, skeptical about that Gartner quote, 83% of the deal happens with the sales rep. I'm going to challenge you. Okay, think about the last expensive thing you bought, whether it was a car or a TV. Think about how much research you did before you talked to a human being. Or maybe you didn't talk to a human being at all, right? And if you folks are like me, and I will watch every video. I will watch and read anything I can to get educated, so I don't have to talk to a car salesman.
Yep.
That is not uncommon. That is totally true. So that 83% is very believable. And if you think about it, our customers can typically go out to our websites and get some of these videos, but they're not the demos that an SE would give, right? So what I like about this tool is we're automating some of that. And what's really killer about that is that, you discover additional stakeholders earlier in the buyer process. Someone doesn't just watch a video and go, that's really interesting, I'm going to keep that to myself. No, they're going to share that video with their boss and their peers and say, hey, check out this technology I'm evaluating. And so you identify those stakeholders earlier in the process. Garen, the CEO of Consensus, he has this concept called selling in the gaps. And what that really means is you are, between meetings, you're lobbing in all this education, right? And the buyer can now get educated without having to talk to the salesperson. So look, over the last couple of months, I've been researching that tool and thinking about it and thinking about video and how do we send these videos to customers. And I thought that was pretty cool in itself. And it is. I think it's super powerful. And I challenge everyone to start thinking about like how you scale your SEs in that capacity. And then something happened a couple weeks ago. Garen Hess, CEO of Consensus, launched a book and sent me a copy. And the book's called Selling is Hard, Buying is Harder. I think it's only been out 2 or 3 weeks. And I started digging into this thing, and I have like one of those like walk away from the keyboard moments. So yes, it's about automated video. Yes, it's about personalized video, but it's anticipating buyer needs before they do. And look, you're going to read these words, buyer enablement, and you might be tempted to check out. And if you're checked out, I'm going to draw your attention here because this is big. And if you get it, you will think very differently about the future of solution engineering. You'll think very differently about what your team is going to look like in the future. So yes, it's about taking some of those Harbor Cruise demos, some of those one-on-one product education videos and putting them in the hands of your customers early in the cycle. And as I mentioned before, you identify a lot more stakeholders earlier. And that's what this diagram is saying. Like traditional process, you meet one stakeholder, you give demos to them, you train them up, you send them all kinds of material, all to be introduced to a second stakeholder next month. And you do that over and over. And are we surprised why sales cycles take months and years? No, because that's how it works. And so with buyer enablement, right, we're pushing the education to them. But here's the killer part, and this is the most critical part. You do it before they ask for it. You anticipate their needs and you put it in their hands. And I'll give you a high-level example. Okay, customer asks for some demos. Okay, you give them some demos. But what you also do is you give them a link to the free trial. And then you also give them a link to someone walking through a success story. Because once someone feels comfortable about your product, they might want to go try it. And after they try it, they're going to go, I wonder who else is doing this well. Okay, so then they do that. And now they come back and they're like, hey, we want to talk about integration. Okay, sweet. Let's send them some integration videos. But let's also send them some security white papers. Because guess what? IT is probably not far behind if they're asking for integration. So, again, buyer enablement, it doesn't jump off the page at you. But think about solution engineers and what our role might be in this, right? Like, I look at that term buyer enablement and I could easily see a department within solution engineering called buyer enablement where we're filling this need, right? And again, it comes back to the content. Who's best suited to make that content that's going to go out to the buyer? It's us. It's the solution engineers. So I don't know, like when I pitch this and I've been talking to people about it, some people get it right away and they like have this look of, holy moly, the world's going to change tomorrow. And then others are like, yeah, I don't really get it. So I don't know. I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, Todd. Well, one, before we go into it, if you have thoughts on the term buyer enablement or what you think this process is, definitely put them in the chat for us to talk about. It's kind of the last section we're going to talk through. But when Todd and I have been talking about the first webinar, the second webinar, we've gotten to know with PreSales Collective, the Consensus team, we just felt like this is something that we care so much about. So me personally, I worked in sales enablement for 4.5 years. I built my career in sales enablement and on these Gartner stats and these details and the age of the educated buyer. And so it is like top of my mind. And I think this is why Todd and I talk about the subject is it is just so interesting how our buyers are changing and our sales in general is changing, but our teams and our strategy are not changing as quickly or as fast and really as rapidly as the evolution of the landscape, right? So like we need to adapt. And so I really like this topic, and it wouldn't be a PreSales Collective event if I wasn't talking about customer centricity and utilizing that role in this kind of component. So Todd, I love your perspective on this, and we're getting a lot of comments as well.
Yeah, and all credit to where credit's due. Like, it's Garen Hess and the team over at the Consensus that have kind of awoken me to this. And like I said, that journey is only 2 weeks old for me. So it's very fresh for me. I'm just kind of sharing what I've learned, but again, all credit to those guys. Like, they're just such thought leaders. And like, once you get it and you see it, you almost can't unsee it. And I think that's why, like I'm on vacation this week. It's just totally messing with my mind. To your point, James, like, I think no one else is going to step up to fill this gap. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because if they would have done it by now.
Yeah. And I think when we talked about, do we incorporate this in today's pre-sales webinar, I mean, the answer was yes, right? Because we keep talking about the future of our role and innovation and things that, you're doing at Salesforce with QBranch. And this does play a role and is going to probably change how we engage moving forward. And so I love your perspective, and I will attest that I have seen the change in you in the past 1 or 2 months since our conversations around it too. Because, Todd and I have talked a few times about these types of things, and it is really interesting. And it really, one of those things that makes you think, okay, this is happening. How am I going to adapt? What am I going to do? Am I going to wait, or am I going to get ahead of this? And that's why I like that we're having this conversation.
Yeah. And again, let's open up some questions here, but if we don't take advantage of it and we don't own it, someone else will.
Yep.
So, let's jump all over this.
Yeah. So in that terms, like, what do you think? Lightly, got a question here, 2 questions around buyer enablement, right? In general, like, what do you think that's going to look like from software? You mentioned the car example, and I actually just went through one of those examples myself, where I actually bought a car in another state. But I had that same experience. So how do you think that's going to change with technology and software?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go into too much detail about the Consensus software, but they give you some really incredible insight into not only what people are watching, but new people that are watching it and for how long. And so that's a technology that I think it's not just about sending videos to people, right? Like, a lot of people do that. They put them on YouTube and, like, great. But this is about sending a video and getting some insight back from the customer that the AE then can put into motion. Oh, wow. They watched that segment on integration. They rewatched it 5 times. Maybe we should talk about integration the next call we have. Maybe I should bring my SE on because I don't know much about it.
Absolutely.
So I think that's an example of how tech's going to play into it. I'm trying to think about others, but that's a big one.
No, I like that. And I want to continue. I'm going to pause the buyer enablement conversation here because I think it's a topic that we can spend a lot more time on. And so overall, I just want to say thanks again, Todd, for your time today. So Todd mentioned he is actually on vacation and doing his pre-sales collective webinar. So really appreciate it. And I got to see a picture of Todd's desk and makeshift setup right now. I won't share it, but Todd is going above and beyond to help the pre-sales community. So I appreciate your time today. We all appreciate your time.
Yeah. And if anyone's curious, so my father-in-law worked for Westinghouse and built a lot of the motors and nuclear turbines that went in submarines and aircraft carriers. And spent 30 years doing that. So I'm in his office, and that's what's behind me. So
yeah, love that. Appreciate it. So as we're wrapping up, just a couple of quick things. So we sent out the quick survey. Let us know how we did today. Answer 1 to 5. Also ping me at any time on the Slack community. Give me some feedback. Let me know how we can make sure this is more valuable and impactful for you. And again, just from the takeaways and recapping, making sure that today we talked about how to elevate your pre-sales function in general, elevate pre-sales into forecast and strategy and planning. Sounds like there's a lot of discussion that people want to continue on that topic, and understanding the changing landscape and what our role is in that. So if you haven't checked out the Pre-Sales Collective podcast, as mentioned in the beginning, we're rolling out a new episode every Monday. It's been a lot of fun hearing some good insights. We're talking about some things that are really top of mind for our profession and for individuals. So please check that out. If you like an episode, I would encourage you to share it with your colleagues, share it with your friends, share it on LinkedIn. These are some individuals who have awesome thoughts, awesome opinions, doing great things, but aren't maybe getting the global recognition that they deserve for it. So please do that. It really helps. As we've talked about every time, Slack is just growing. So big shout out to Brian Mazzaferri, who runs our Slack community. We're at over 735 individuals globally, and it's amazing. And, we talked about with the Pre-Sales Collective, making sure we're doing things two-way, right? You can sit on these webinars, you can join the podcast, but how are you getting more and talking to people? And the Slack community has been great. We have geo channels, so local regions are getting together. We have virtual coffees, mentor networks, things that are connecting people, and it's been great to see. So definitely lean into Slack, and thanks again, Brian Mazzaferri, for your help there. And then in July, we have 2 more webinars coming up. The first one is bringing cultural realities to a virtual pre-sales world, which is going to be in our APAC time zone. So most of you, I would assume, will be asleep when that one happens, but we're definitely looking forward to that one. Exciting group with a lot of good experience. And then preparing our teams for the new normal. Definitely looking excited to that one with Adam Freeman, Nastasia Boss, and Justin Ibbs. We're going to be talking about, the future of the landscape and what things actually mean for the rest of this fiscal year and next year, especially with COVID continuing to affect the globe. And then just last thing, beyond the demo, we did a candidate spotlight recently. So if you've lost a job or you're in between jobs and looking to get back out into the field, please reach out to us, reach out to Hannah Bloking. She runs our Beyond the Demo newsletter. She's doing a great job. We're trying to highlight different individuals in excuse me, in the community looking for a role. And otherwise, just follow us on LinkedIn. Feel free to add PreSales Collective as a member to your LinkedIn if you feel the need. But we'll be posting a lot more content and unique content on LinkedIn moving forward. So otherwise, thank you again for your time. Todd, thanks again for your perspective. Always appreciate it, and hope to see everybody next time. Have a good rest of your week.